Hi, welcome to chapter one of The Doomed Planet, the worst disaster imaginable. S- Seven stood on the shuttle. It was an old ship with many internal attachments that shook and rattled. Passengers packed the ship way beyond the number that Seven assumed must have been permissible under concession regulations, and he held on tight to a metal bar which did little to stop him from being thrown around. He looked with envy at the passengers sitting on the guard seat. He looked like he might be high on something, and Seven knew he wasn't the guard. Seven hadn't seen an actual guard on the shuttle for years. They expected passengers to fend for themselves, and they often had to. The passenger rocked backwards and forwards as the shuttle lurched from side to side. Seven wondered what the nature of the training for shuttle pilots was. He assumed they must recruit them from the desert kart races, which Seven used to enjoy watching as a youngster. Seven noticed how blue the passenger's skin was and thought he must be from one of the communities, as the concession named them. Seven was blue as well, but he was much closer to the standard turquoise, which the concession often reminded the populace through their propaganda was the colour of true citizenship. He wasn't the green side of turquoise like the elite, but nobody of that hue would be found dead on a shuttle. In fact, if one was found on a shuttle, then they probably were dead. Just as these thoughts were passing between Seven's antennae, the deep blue passenger fell off the guard seat and skidded across the floor, coming to a rest in a pool of ambiguous liquid. He remained there motionless, dead maybe, but not well and in need of immediate help. Seven didn't lose a moment before leaping into action. He jumped into the vacated guard seat before any of the other passengers could have the same idea. He didn't always get these regional shuttles that the system's ruling corporation theoretically operated, but which were in reality run by private individuals who would pay bribes to operate the route between the concession and the neighboring colonies. Seven preferred the concession's own shuttles, which were just as packed but were newer and more reliable. Seven had been to visit his aunt. He was worried she was losing her marbles. The concession workers commonly considered the marbles, small spheres at the end of the antenna, to be the source of sanity. All his aunt did was complain about the concession and the corporation turning them all into slaves, while Seven told her she should consider herself lucky that the concession was there to provide for them at all. His aunt wasn't his main preoccupation, however. Today he had been Today had been the representation lottery, and it terrified Seven that, despite the huge odds against it, they might select him as the one to represent the workers on the concession council. Seven couldn't think of anything worse than being summoned to sit on the concession council. As the shuttle docked in the terminal, Seven could see what looked like hundreds of other shuttles docking, awaiting passengers or already moving away from the terminal. Huge conveyors were carrying passengers to and from the many levels. Seven disembarked. From a distance, the terminal, with its many lights, had looked impressive, but close up, Seven could see that the terminal looked old and tatty, like it was falling apart bit by bit. As he walked along the corridor, a roofing tile fell off, crushing a fellow commuter. Outside the terminal, it was raining, and puddles were burning into the road. Seven had no option than to make a run for it, and then rinse off the acidic liquid as soon as he reached his container. His container was on level 110 of a stack, which was only a short distance from the terminal. On the following day, he got a seat on the concession shuttle. The only way he could do this was to get one which went the long way round. Direct shuttles were always packed to the airlocks, so Seven would get up earlier than he needed and compensate for the extra time with a place on one of the uncomfortable hard seats. Even today, the day before binge, the shuttle was busy. Seven wondered why they couldn't run more shuttles, even though he knew the answer. It cost credits. Seven hated binge, the one day in the solar circle when all the workers had the day off and got high. It was a messy affair. and at 23 circles, Seven felt too old for that kind of frivolity. He would rather sit in his container and watch a good story, but rules were rules, and he didn't want to risk being penalised. He felt anxious, not because of binge, but because today the council would announce the results of the representation lottery. Seven knew the odds of his number coming out of the machine were astronomical. He offered a silent prayer to the giant sky cup and hoped it was listening. Throughout his life, Seven had avoided attention. He enjoyed nothing more than being ignored. Being selected for the council would be the worst disaster imaginable. They would plaster his face all over the story screens at every corner of the colony, and everyone would know who he was. It would ruin his glorious anonymity forever. He tried to take his marbles off things by listening to his entertainment implant, but he was tiring of the concession playlist, though he would never admit that to anyone for fear of being penalised. Seven's shuttle was getting close to the terminal, where he would need to change into a second shuttle to getting close enough to his assigned department. It would be a lot easier if the council had allocated a container closer to his department, but he assumed they had their reasons. On the second shuttle, he also got a seat. He couldn't believe it. This was an omen, a sign from the giant cup. Everything would be okay. The recorded voice asking him to hold tight, to not defecate on the shuttle, and to enjoy his journey didn't annoy him as it usually did. Today would be a good day, and it was binge tomorrow, and that wouldn't be as bad as he was expecting either. His department was located in an area filled with so many commercial container stacks that the starlight didn't quite reach ground level, and Seven was glad that the walk from his shuttle terminal to his department stack was a short one. Seven felt a new wave of anxiety rising within him. This time it wasn't because of lottery or binge day. It was because in a few moments he would enter his department stack and he would have to get to his work area without bumping into his nemesis, Four. Four was a bully who used to lie in wait for Seven and then pounce on him with a barrage of humiliating taunts. Sometimes Seven would have to take tortuous routes to his work area to avoid contact with Four, and he wasn't always successful. Today was one of those days. Seven! His antennae quivered at the sound of Four's voice. Seven! Why are you running away? I'm not going to eat you, am I? Four caught up with him and flashed all three rows of his sharp teeth. Four prided himself on being on the green side of turquoise, but Seven figured he couldn't be all that, especially if he was working in the stacks for the concession. What do you want, Four? Oh, somebody got up on the wrong side of the container, Four mocked. At times like this, binge didn't seem so bad. Seven would rather be off his antennae on fushy juice than listening to Four. Leave me alone. I've work to do, Seven grumbled. Haven't you heard? I guess you're not in the loop, Four laughed. There's an assembly. They're going to announce the results of the lottery. That was all Seven needed. He was struggling to meet his targets as it was. The last thing he needed was to waste time in a pointless meeting just to see which poor fusher they would sacrifice to the media sideshow of the Concession Representation Council. He followed Ford to the arena, where the workers were gathering to hear the announcement. Workers who were meeting their targets seemed happy for a bit of time off, and most were looking forward to the day off for binge tomorrow. Security around the arena was heavier than usual, and Seven wondered whether they were expecting another terrorist attack. The thought made him even more nervous. Seven watched as 30, one of the concession supervisors, tuned in the huge screen which would display the results of the lottery. The huge screen crackled into life, and images of the council chamber came into focus. He felt tired and wished he could sit down. When the council members came into focus, Seven realized how green they all were. He was sure they hadn't been as green last year. They made 30 look blue, even though 30 was the greenest of anyone whom Seven had met in real life. Four seemed to be getting into the spirit of things. What would you do if your name came out in the lottery? 7 asked. I would be honoured, he said, standing straighter. I'm the material they are looking for, and it wouldn't surprise me if I was chosen. But it's a lottery. Exactly. It wouldn't surprise me if they chose me in the lottery. But that's not how lotteries work. Oh, never mind. Seven prepared himself for the long haul. He knew that before they would draw the name, there would be a line of council members queuing up to deliver long, tedious speeches designed to reinforce their own importance. There was a scuffle behind them, and Seven turned to see a pair of very dark blue antennae disappearing into the crowd, pursued by several members of the security forces. Resistance, said Four, not taking his eyes off the big screen. Resistance? What are they resisting? The concession gives us work and accommodation and food. Some people don't know when they're well off. Some people are never satisfied. Exactly, said Seven. He caught himself agreeing with Four, and the sensation was almost irritating. The speeches began, and Seven's eyes began to glaze over. The speeches were almost identical year in, year out, and although he agreed with their sentiment, he was eager to get back to his work. Those targets wouldn't meet themselves. When the last council member had delivered his final dramatic phrase, they made preparations for the draw. Seven watched as they moved the huge machine into place, containing thousands of balls, each printed with the name of a worker. The huge crowd had fallen silent now. Many of the workers were praying to the giant cup in the sky that their name would be the one drawn. Seven was praying to the giant cup in the sky that they would get on with it so he could get back to his targets. The chief council member pressed a button, which turned on the machine, and a great cage containing thousands of balls began to turn. It was so quiet you could hear an antenna twitch. After what seemed to Seven like an eternity, the chief council member pressed a second button, which released one ball. Seven noticed the ball was just the blue side of turquoise. It rolled down the wire track and fell into the waiting hand of the chief council member, who lifted it up to read the name. The worker selected to be this year's representative on the concession council is. The chief council member held up the name for everyone in the arena to see. Seven fainted. I hope you enjoyed chapter 1 of The Doomed Planet. That was called The Worst Disaster Imaginable. Chapter 2 is called The Cavern of Mystery, and if you subscribe and get notifications, excuse me, by clicking any of these buttons below, then you will be able to hear me read chapter 2. If you can't wait, then you can you can download a sample of the book on my website, www.mjdees.com, or you can buy the copy on Amazon and all good online bookstores. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.